And then I said to her, 25 copper? You gotta be having a laugh. Oh, hello there. Didn't see you there. My name's Ben. Welcome to Motor Day UK. Today we're going to go over a little bit of my history of two-wheeled motorcycle addiction. Going to be putting it over a little bit of footage of riding the bikes and working on them, because you don't want to be staring at my ugly mug for the next 8 to 9 minutes. Enjoy. Biking started for me sometime in the early 2000s when my dad, who I blame all this on by the way, came home one day with the GS 500F, which he didn't have his license for. I found out then that he had an old RD50 back in the day, before family life and sensible choices got in the way, which was basically his first child. Life was slowing with his kids being teenagers. He decided to get back into it and was doing his direct access so he could ride again. We used to go out to the garage, warm up the bike, rev it a bit, and go up and down the drive. Between buying the GS and passing his test, a couple of months later, he racked up somewhere around 7 miles, going up and down a driveway that was 10 metres long at most. Maybe the addiction to motorcycles is genetic. Once he passed his test, he took me out on the back of the bike, and I was pretty much well sold on the whole two-wheel death machine idea, and I would take any excuse to get on the back of the bike, whether it was to a doctor's appointment, random ride out, or an 8-hour round trip to a bike show in the south of England, where I was way too ill to be safe on the back of the bike. Once I grew up a bit and moved out, I passed my driving test thanks to the job I worked at the time, and got myself a car. My job involved moving around a lot, and a car fit everything I owned at the time, so it made sense to me, but I still wanted to get a bike. I ended up buying the GS 500 off my dad, who had also sold me my first car, but not long after buying the GS, I crashed the car and needed to fund repairs, hence the GS was sold. Sad face emoji. Around this time, I also did my first CBT at a training school near York, and it was booked in January, so it was pretty sketchy with all the ice on the ground. I ended up coming off the bike while practicing the emergency stops, but the instructor was actually spot on, and sat on the back of the bike on the way back to the yard to help build my confidence back up after my spill. He was a good lad. A few years go by, and life kinda takes over. I start getting a house and all the normal things society expects you to have, and I also develop a taste for fast-ish cars. But the idea of riding was always in the back of my mind, and around about 2010 I bought a T-Reg Ninja 636 with the intention of passing my test, but I never got round to the test because of money, and the Ninja was relegated to being ridden off-road. I can tell you a sports bike and off-road riding isn't a good combination, though the Ninja was eventually sold to fund other projects that I had on the go at the time. So fast forward to 2017, I'm no longer in the job that requires moving every couple of years, and life's very different to how it was when I first got into bikes. I hadn't been driving for a while and was looking to get another form of transport again, and I booked myself in for another CBT. I go to the local training school in our city and realise just how little riding skill I have left due to the years since I actually sat on a bike and do any riding. And I actually did worse than what I did on my first CBT, but I calmed down, screw my head on, get the certificate, and it's now time to choose a bike. Now, part of my rationale behind getting into bikes, or at least what I told myself to justify it, is how much cheaper they can be to run than cars. Like a 125 gets about 100 to the gallon no matter how you ride it, and tax is basically nothing, and insurance is comparatively cheap. Though honestly, I just really liked bikes. I was looking at bikes, and I knew I wanted something new. I don't have any real justification for it, I just wanted something that no one had been sat on before, and was always going to be totally mine. Looking at the price of Suzuki's, Hondas, Yamahas, I didn't particularly want to pay $3,000 for a 125 that I'd probably drop, ride hard constantly, use it throughout winter, modify, void the warranty anyway. So after a bit of research, I settled on a Lexmoto Assault. Now, yes, it's Chinese, and Chinese bikes don't have the reputation for reliability or enjoyability or really anything good, to be honest. But I'd always worked on my own vehicles before, and let's face it, anything's more reliable than the dregs of Auto Trader that I was used to. This is back pre-Gumtree days we're talking. We picked up the bike and had surprisingly few issues. My main gripe was with the wiring on the bike that was just very obviously cheap, that the loom was slowly being replaced with wiring of decent quality as I patched the loom to keep the bike running. The Assault, or Nigel as he became known, got me through some pretty bad weather and some surprising tours, as now I was riding rather than riding bitch. Me and my dad started going on camping holidays on the bike, which are a whole story in their own. Eventually, after about 10,000 miles in a year or so, Nigel was consigned to the scrapyard. Or so I thought. I was heading out in the back end of nowhere in Fife, and the master link of my chain snapped, thanks to cheap Amazon link clips, and the chain jammed between the front sprocket and the engine casing, so I had to get towed home, and upon further inspection it seemed the gearbox had seized. Nigel sat in the garage, a shell of his former self, and I needed another bike to get to work, so being a fan of dirt bikes, I picked up an M2R 125cc dirt bike, I reloomed it, fitted lights, a plate, mirrors, and all the requirements to get it on the road, and got it fully registered through a few loopholes in the system. During the process, I decided that the bike would be named after the build was complete, though I had various issues with the regulator rectifier overheating and failing, and once, in my frustration, things not working properly, I kicked the dirt bike and yelled at it, "You're just like your father!" And the bike was henceforth known as Nigel Jr. During one of the times Nigel Jr. was giving me grief, I was left stranded about 6 miles away from my house, and I had to push him home. Luckily, being a CRF 110 clone, he weighed about 10 stone wet, and on this long walk I passed one of the lads who lived nearby, who, a few days later, because they couldn't help me out on the day, offered me an old WK125RR with a non-functioning engine, so I could strip off any parts that I needed for the build. And then, 2 days after finishing Nigel Jr. and getting him fully working, ironing out all the creases, he was stolen. All that I recovered was his wing mirrors, and I was gutted. Now, with Nigel Jr. MIA, and me still needing a bike to get to work, I hatched a plan. Internet research told me that the two bikes, the WK125RR and the Lex Moto Assault, despite having different engines, both shared a gearbox. So the plan was to get both engines out, swap the gearboxes over, and then put Nigel's engine in the WK frame, and by combining these two broken, sad machines, I would have one complete working bike. I set to work, but Nigel's frame was so rusted and crusty, the engine mounts were seized, so I had to cut the engine out of the frame and set about stripping and rebuilding the engine. Whilst turning the engine to top dead centre so I could make sure the timing was correct, I heard a clunk and the output shaft start spinning. Well, at least I didn't need to do a gearbox swap. The bike that resulted from this build became known as Frankenweenie due to its nature of being built from scrap parts, but unfortunately still not running quite right. He's misfiring. I think at some point the timing chain might have slipped, and I've bought another bike to get me to and from work. Enter AJ, the most boring yet reliable bike I've owned to date. AJ is a Lex Moto Iska, going back to the Lex Moto again, got him brand new, and with him I've had no issues at all. He always works, and I think I'm slowly beginning to resent him for it, although at least it's reliable and currently my main form of transport. So the plans moving forward is to get my full license, as I've finally reached the point where I'm done with 125s being my only option, although a part of me does always think that I'll have one knocking about just to work on and mess about on, though I do have an XJ600 to build. I want to finally finish Frankenweenie and potentially rid myself of the Iska, though the more I ride him, the more I want to keep him, and I don't really know why. So there you have it, brief introduction to my motorcycle addiction. Most of my motorcycles at the moment are broken, but they're on the way to being fixed, and we'll be covering that in future videos. So that being said, thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear any stories you've got down in the comments below. And we'll see you all next time. Cheerio.